Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming. We would like to welcome you to the Espionage Panel Discussion, a program part of Los Alamos Science Fest. Science Fest celebrates Los Alamos heritage with history and science-based events for the entire family, and this year's theme is espionage. Los Alamos Main Street produces Science Fest in collaboration with the Los Alamos Creative District and Los Alamos County. Thank you for participating, and we hope you enjoy the entire weekend with full programming. My name is Suzette Fox, and I'm the director of Los Alamos Main Street, and so I put on the entire event with a lot of help from staff. But first I'd like to introduce our speakers today, and we're going to start with Ellen Bradbury-Reed. Ellen grew up in Los Alamos and from a very early age was fascinated with what was going on here. Her father worked on the shaped explosive charges for the implosion detonator for the plutonium bomb. After graduation from Los Alamos High School, Ellen went on to University of Vienna, received her bachelor's and master's from University of New Mexico, and then attended Yale University. Ellen married John Bradbury, middle son of Norris Bradbury, who succeeded Oppenheimer as director of Los Alamos Laboratory. She had many conversations with Norris, who was well aware of the complex problems presented by nuclear weapons. Later, she began to organize seminars on the Manhattan Project and its legacies. These were very successful and sponsored by the Smithsonian and MIT for a period of 15 years. She also organized workshops at the Santa Fe Institute on the legacies of the Manhattan Project and written several books. We are so grateful to have Ellen here today and to lead our talk about Manhattan Project espionage.
Can you hear? Yes. Okay. I'm going to read parts of this, and partly because if you have a question, I think with this stuff, it's better to ask the question when you have it than to say, sometimes people say, hold your questions. But if you have a question, go ahead. I don't lose my place, I promise. I thought I would start out with a little bit of history about Russia, because it's hard for us to think of Russia, a country that had never experienced a Renaissance, a Reformation, rationalism, or any of the events that really shaped Western thinking. The czars ruled absolutely, and they employed spies to keep track of everything and everyone. It's a very different culture and attitude toward spying than what we have, where spying was a way of life and death. And you know all this, but in 1917 the czars were overthrown, and then there were more in Russia, revolutions and upheavals. As these revolutions fell apart, new ideas of how to govern failed, and other revolutions, the Bolshevik Revolution, followed. The Bolshevik Revolution in particular began to advocate education and science. The czars had tried to put a brake on education and science. So when Marx and Lenin come in, they engineer their revolution, and they're looking for a way to organize a government that won't fail and will be able to feed Russia. So they called this system scientific socialism. And it isn't really what we today would call scientific, but at least they gave lip service. One of the things that's really shocking to learn is that, always Russia's had a huge problem feeding their population. And even today, the median income for a Russian citizen, the median, is $840 a year. So it's still unstable. Before 1920, Soviet intelligence, and there was very little of it, had focused on the military and industrial espionage in the United States, which was the leader in both of those areas. By 1936, there were agents in place in the United States. Probably the one you'll know is Alger Hiss, the most upper class and comparable in some ways to the British system, the Cambridge Five, or the models for James Bond. There are 4 mid-level spies in the State Department in addition to Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss went to Yale. He was a blue-eyed, he was a gentleman. He was uncovered, you might remember, by Whittaker Chambers, who was not very upper class. And so we tended to believe that Alger Hiss was telling the truth when he said he was not spying. It's very similar to the Cambridge Five, who were so highly placed, so Cambridge, so elegant, so tweedy, they couldn't possibly be spies. They were. So by the late 30s, the Soviet Union had a pretty good spy network in place. But in 1936, inside the Soviet Union, which is really experiencing terrible times of hunger, and it's so big, it's sort of rolling unrest, they have a meeting that calls into question the position of physics. Do we need physics, or is it really more important to feed our population? So they agree that they will really sort of push physics way back and work on industrializing the farming practices of Russia. So that hurts the espionage effort. And in the late 1930s, Stalin, who's very paranoid, has a particularly bad fit of paranoia, and he begins to invite his top agents in the United States back to Russia. Do you want to see your grandmother? Perhaps your aunt is really missing you. And he would invite them back, and then he would kill them. And this had the effect of depleting the whole upper ranks of his espionage system in the United States. At the same time, in the United States, we arrested and deported a top Russian operative whose code name is Gennady. He was supposed to have run the Trotsky assassination in Mexico in 1940. A lot of people claim they ran the Trotsky assassination. But his arrest, Gennady's arrest in 1940, begins to you really take apart another part of the existing network. And in 1945, he dies in the arms of his lover, Elizabeth Bentley, and she names everybody. They turn. And so when there are 2 times when the Soviet network of espionage in the United States is just taken apart at the top. And at the end of the 30s, when Stalin takes everybody home and kills them, and when Elizabeth Bentley cracks and names everybody. So they're in between those times, say 1941 to 1945, they have to rebuild their network, and they have to figure out what's happening, particularly here at Los Alamos. I go on to say we always think the KGB are super clever, skillful, fearsome, and what we know now, because we can read the Venona code. The Venona code is the Soviet code. You know, there's the Nazi Enigma code, there's a Japanese code called Magic, and there's Venona. And Venona, we worked on decrypting Venona. And so last month, Recursos and the Council for International Relations in Santa Fe, we hosted John Earl Hayes and Harvey Clare, who are the top experts on the Venona Code. They've worked for years, including 3 books, on putting the Venona documents in order and trying to figure out if there are gaps in the decrypts, what those gaps might be. I told some of you this on this tour, what happened to them miraculously. After the second book, they get a note from Andrei Vasiliev, who is a KGB officer who wrote this Venona documents. He's writing the documents, please meet them here, remember, this is what you need to get. He says, well, I've read your books and they're pretty good, but I have the originals of all of these spy messages, so I don't regret anything I did, but I really believe history should be correct. So I can come and help you fill in the gaps in your books. So now they have a third book or fourth book with Andre. So we can really read the Venona documents now. We have really all the gaps and the code names and everything are filled in. So espionage is a regular part of running Russia. It's organized and it's reorganized. The KGB, and I'm not going to go through all their names, formerly the NKVD, is a very big bureaucratic organization. The agents are organized in groups, they don't overlap, and they run in parallel lines. So you have one agent doing something, you may have another agent right next to him, but doing the same thing, but they don't know each other. And this is the whole operation, the KGB, is run by Lavrentiy Beria, who, if there's anybody meaner, more cruel, more treacherous than Stalin, it's Lavrentiy Beria. And Lavrentiy Beria is getting quite good information from Los Alamos, and Alan talked about these guys more. But Lavrentiy doesn't believe it. He can't believe he's getting this really good information, and so he thinks it's disinformation. So for a while they're getting this excellent Klaus Fuchs, Ted Hall, and passing things, Lavrentiy Beria thinks it's the truth. He's not falling for it. And this attitude of paranoia really pervades the whole Soviet operation and really hurts them. So that by the end of 45, after the two bombs, Beria finally has to believe that, yeah, he got the right information. But the Soviets initially failed to see the importance of these bombs and how they changed the way the politics of the world operate. So in the United States, where it took the KGB a while to rebuild their networks, and the KGB also struggled to figure out what was going on. They knew there was some big effort, which the Soviet name for the Manhattan Project is enormous. Right. Now, in England, you have a totally different situation because you have the Cambridge Five. And these are the old boys. They are upper-class Brits. They're educated at Oxford or Cambridge. They wear tweed. They all went, to the right under schools. They marry and exchange wives among the right sort. They drink. They carouse. They are like Ian Fleming is one of them. So he writes the James Bond novels, and probably the most famous model is Kim Philby. He's the charming, they're beautifully educated and they have kind of a good time being spies. Other members of the group are Donald McLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, who's an arbitrary advisor to Queen Elizabeth. I mean, they're extremely highly placed. And the most important is John Carencross, who is the secretary to Lord Hankey, who is in charge of the British efforts to build a nuclear weapon. So every time they do anything, Carencross just stays late to work, late, and takes pictures of whatever's gone on, and it goes right out to the Soviets. So they have beautiful information. The result of this is that in 1941, the Soviets have a copy of the Maud report, which Carencross stole from his boss and copied, possibly before the United States does. This report concludes that it will be possible to build an effective uranium bomb. And following the information in that report, some other things, Los Alamos begins to do serious work on an atomic bomb, which eventually results in Los Alamos. So the KGB, here's something is going to happen. But their first task is to identify what and where. They are instructed to plant group leaders and contact people at Oak Ridge, which they believe is the main facility. And pretty soon, though, they catch on and know there's something called Project Y, which is Los Alamos. So they get it right, and they begin a long and fruitless campaign to get inside Los Alamos. The KGB then, these are the KGB agents, is constantly rebuked by Moscow. And I have some quotes. In the presence of this research work, which is being conducted right next to you there in Santa Fe, and the slow pace of agent recruitment, we find this a particularly intolerable situation. The KGB goes on to point out to their operatives in Santa Fe that the English are doing much better. And this is work of the Cambridge Five, who are very highly placed, and there's no equivalent in the United States. The problem really is that it's not that they're not getting the information, they're getting it from Klaus Hughes and Ted Hull, but it's not coming from KGB agents. It's coming from volunteers, and that's not correct. So they get scolded all the time, and this is in the Venona documents that they fuss at them for not doing this. They want them to get inside Los Alamos. And as you all know, Los Alamos is pretty sealed up at the time, and they don't get anybody inside. Their first choice might have been, and we don't know this, Kitty Oppenheimer. She had been married to a guy named Joe Dowd. Oppenheimer's her fourth husband. She's 28. Fourth husband? 28? You know, even today, Elizabeth Taylor. But her second husband, Joe Dowd, is a real communist. He's a card-carrying communist. They live in Chicago. They hand out literature, propaganda, and she's a real communist. And so the other thing about Kitty, she never breaks. She never does. They don't ever contact her. If they do, we don't know about it, but she never passes any information. And of course, the second and more important target is Oppenheimer himself. The Venona documents identify him as Chester. That's his code name. They say he's of great interest, and they think he's in charge of the cyclotron. Really? You know, they have him confused with Lawrence. It's like, guys, come on. They also mention cultivating his brother, Frank. But neither Oppie nor Frank ever passed any information. There is a contact that we know about that was made in the winter of 42 to 43. Hercon Chevalier at a cocktail party at Oppie's house. Meets him in the kitchen, maybe they're making Oppenheimer martinis, and he says to him, if you ever want to pass any information, I will help you. And Oppenheimer says, no, I will not, I don't. So nothing happened. And the KGB notes indicate, quote, his recruitment does not seem possible. But clearly the KGB understood that he was important before they understood what he was doing. A little bit to do with cyclotron. These notes may reflect the fact that there are all these braces. A GRU officer had heard from Steve Nelson, who was the head of the American Communist Party at the time, that Oppenheimer had been distancing himself from his earlier communist connections as his involvement with the Manhattan Project increased. And we could note that Steve Nelson did not contact Kitty, whom he had comforted in quotes, after the death of her second husband, comforted her for 3 months in Paris. After the death of her second husband in the Spanish Civil War. So, you know, look at Kitty. I mean, somebody said, Jean Tatlock's other lover is maybe fuchsia. Kitty is bright red, but she doesn't budge. She doesn't turn him in. So the situation with the KGB is they're getting good information from Klaus Fuchs, Tim Hall, and in some ways Green Glass, maybe less useful. Green Glass turns out to have worked, not for, I don't know whether he worked for my father, but he worked at S-Site in the machine shops. And my father, after he was identified, said, well, he didn't think he was very smart, but you don't have to be very smart to put a file under your arm and walk out. So, Green green glass is Ethel Rosenberg's brother. So you have these connections. Anyway, the way this information is passed is almost all in Santa Fe because they can't get into Los Alamos. So they have these ways of passing information, and they get, I'll read you some of these instructions, which I think are funny, from the KGB. They tell Hughes that, they tell Harry Gold, who is the courier, so Klaus Hughes is going to be Harry Gold and hand documents. So this is how they set it up. They say Fuchs is only allowed 1 day a month off to go to Santa Fe. So make the date for the first station of